Morning. This is Tom Forbes. We appreciate your joining us today for our Nerdy 30 webinar. We have our terrific media panelists that you've seen before. This is our second media panel discussion during this session of the legislature, and we plan to do this regularly throughout the session. And we appreciate their willingness to share our thoughts and perspectives on everything happening in and around the legislature. Before I hand things over, a few housekeeping items. If you have questions during the discussion, please submit via the chat or the Q&A function. For those of you who are PAT members, thank you for being members and supporting our mission. And if you're not a member, we would like very much for you to join us. The link for more information is in the chat. Regarding the Texas Ethics Commission sunset review process, Pat has been involved in the review cycle for the Ethics Commission in a variety of ways, including recommendations for improvements and monitoring the review process. We will continue to update our members as it makes its way through the legislative process. Today's presenters, Jim Henson directs the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin and teaches in the Department of Government at UT Austin. Romer Jeffers is the political writer for the Dallas Morning News. Brad Johnson is the senior reporter and managing editor of the Texan, and Harvey Kronberg is the CEO and publisher of the Quorum Report. Thank you all for being our panel. We always appreciate an opportunity to hear from you. Take it away, Jim. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom, and welcome to everybody. Welcome back, everybody in the audience, and of course to my friends on the panel. We were talking beforehand and trying to figure out where to start, and I'm just going to start with dessert rather than the main course, although, you know, if you eat enough at dessert, it becomes the main course. So while everybody knew that, of course, gaming was going to be out there as an issue during this session, in the last several days, we've seen this big blow up around the Texas lottery. All three of you I know have thoughts on this. Gromer, you kind of volunteered, even though you are clearly not on the lottery beat. Yeah, you were tasked with following this. So in the term that, you know, nobody that ever speaks up goes unpunished, we'll start with you. So
yeah,
give us a little bit of the bullet on this, how this became an issue and where we are based on some of the really brutal testimony and questioning that we saw in the legislature this week.
yeah, it has been brutal, and also it goes to show you, political reporters' reach is wide, all kind of topics. But look, the Texas lottery has been, lawmakers have been nipping at them for a few years now, ever since there's been this use of courier services to purchase tickets. And what I mean by that is the lottery was intended to be a person-to-person. I go to Harvey's 7-Eleven and he sells me a lottery ticket and I buy it from him. You can't do it over the phone, online, or anything like that. Well, over the years, there's been a get around for that, where these services create these apps where you can say, hey, I want lottery tickets, and then they go to the outlet and buy the tickets and all of that. That's one of the issues. And then the other is these bulk ticket events that have been occurring. And we've had two of note in 2023. An outfit out of London or overseas bought $25 million in tickets to win a jackpot of 95 million, I believe, jackpot, which was a nice little profit for them. And then you had a bulk ticket event just this month in Austin, where our lieutenant governor went and did some investigation of that, tried to stick a camera into the facility where those tickets were bought. and saw about 30 machines there, which raised concerns. So senators and state house members have been concerned that people are not only gaming the lottery, but the intent of the lottery is being circumvented, and maybe minors and are buying lottery tickets as well. So they've been really aggressive with the lottery to reform that. And oh, by the way, they've announced investigations. The governor has announced an investigation, asked the Texas Rangers, directed the Texas Rangers to investigate. And this morning, Ken Paxton has announced an investigation of its own. And as you know, Jim, an issue like this, lawmakers are going to be lawmakers. So they've been sounding off about it in hearings, and it may come up in the Senate today as well.
So somebody's coverage of this, and forgive me, I can't remember exactly whose it was, made the observation about the hearings in the legislature this week that, nobody came to the lottery's defense. Sometimes in these things, there's somebody at least that will try to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. And I didn't watch every minute of the hearing, but what I saw no hint of that. So Brad,
bipartisanship, right, Jim?
Yeah, we've been asking for bipartisanship. All you need is somebody down on the ground, with their, exposed for a good kicking, and that's kind of what we're seeing here. Brad, you wrote pretty extensively about this in your newsletter. What would you add to that?
Yeah, well, Senator Bob Hall's been on this train for a while. In fact, the bill that we've seen move through the process in the last week or so predates this whole scandal. And a big reason was regulating the purchase of it online, fear of whether, youths are purchasing these tickets through these apps. And then it just it didn't just snowball, it exploded into this whole other thing. A couple observations on this, this is kind of a double-edged sword for the broader gambling lobby. Does this take them all down with the lottery, in their future prospects for legalizing gambling? Or is this oh my gosh, here's the shiny thing over here. You guys really suck. You're going to get all the heat while we, kind of evade at least most of it. I mean, frankly, expanded gambling is not going anywhere this session. It's just not going to happen. But the question is, do the sports gambling guys, one of whom is DraftKings, who owned the courier service that Dan Patrick went and investigated, do they get tied into this? Do the casino guys get tied into this, or do they manage to avoid that and the fallout from that? We'll see, but right now this is the hottest thing since sliced bread.
And Brad,
I want to come to you on. Yeah, go ahead, Gromer.
I was about to say, Brad, what's really interesting about this is that it's kind of shocking that, lotteries have been around a long time, that these issues in a state like Texas can pop up. There's literally no sophistication, it appears, to the implementation of this lottery.
A historical point on this. So in a past life, I used to do consulting, and one of my coworkers schemed up this idea to try and pay for a bridge at the time I was in Cincinnati through a lottery. That's how they used to do it way back in the day, back in the early 1800s. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly when it stopped, but this is how they raised money for that. So it has that application, but it's far beyond that.
As long as we're doing a historical perspective, I might mention that when the lottery was founded originally by Ann Richards, it was an Ann Richards initiative. It was originally going to be supervision was going to be put in the comptroller's office. And John Sharp was furious. He knew that there was always going to be an implication of scandal or the possibility of scandal. And particularly because the lottery is run by outside contractors, and now the courier services are outside contractors. There's a lot of moving parts that can cause problems.
Harvey, I want to go to give you a little bit of big picture thing. I thought two things when I first saw the Dan Patrick video. One, to Brad's point, of your two routes there, Brad, that it kind of poisons the discussion, even though nothing was going to happen anyway, or maybe they're able to turn this into a good gaming, bad gaming scenario. To my mind, the first thing I thought was particularly given the lieutenant governor's position on this. This is going to have a negative effect on the gaming discussion overall. I mean, I think I would probably bet a little more strongly on that than, but I'm interested to hear what people think about that. Second is, it was very interesting to see the lieutenant governor in that mode and talking about a subject that was not the kinds of things that he has been more focused on recently. I'm putting that as diplomatically as I can, but this was not wading into the guts of, conflicts between the House and the Senate. It was not, different versions of these bills, big, fundamental bills that we'll be talking about in a little bit. It was kind of a classic Dan Patrick showing his media skills. I mean, you referenced the report, Gromer. I mean, that could have been, pick your brand of the local networks doing public service.
Exactly.
I'm going to show up and, put a mic in somebody's face, journalism. Look, you got credit to the lieutenant governor. He still got chops.
He does. And he apparently he wanted his credit because on Monday, when the lottery executive director and I might point out Ryan Mendel, I think that's his name, and he was an executive director in 2023 when that first jackpot hit, but he made the decision to ban couriers after they've been trying to get him to do so for so long.
And they said they couldn't.
Yeah. And so Patrick sent on social media, went on a tear, like, almost like, how dare you take this position now? By the way, it was the Senate who did this, and don't forget my investigation. Right. Now you act. So he's pretty proud of it. And I would say in terms of our cultural references, it was actually great. It was like, I'm shocked that the gambling is going on here. Exactly, Casablanca.
Shout out to Scott Braddock's podcast where he pulled sound from Marvin Zindler. Did his whole segment on the lottery and then ended up with Marvin Zindler, Eyewitness News.
There you go. All right, so let's move on then to other things. I mean, but this is really one of those things that I think you don't necessarily see coming, and all of a sudden, it's a huge story and going to have some impact, I think, going through this and going through.
Yeah, I have one more thing.
Please.
One more thing, Jim, and that is the lottery was originally created in 1990 because we had just come out of a huge budget crisis in the 1980s, and right now we have the luxury of potentially talking about eliminating the lottery because we continue to have budget surpluses. But most of the folks, budget forecasters I talk to, think that next session is going to be without a surplus and perhaps even a deficit. And right now, nobody is thinking about plugging that hole. But if they do eliminate the lottery, obviously, it's going to have a fiscal consequence going into 27. $2
billion is up to now bringing in for schools and a little bit for veterans. But
all right, so that's actually a good segue, Harvey. Thanks to talking about what we're now seeing with property tax reduction and what that's going to cost and how that fight is shaping up in the Senate. I mean, in the House, in the legislature, this looks a little like the way it started last time in terms of starting positions. Not exactly, and it's one of those things. Well, how much have things changed? Is that fair, Brad?
I mean, we're back at a crossroads between the two chambers where the House is selecting, at least now it's more pointedly pro-business. Back then there was the last session, they had the appraisal cap idea and that benefited particularly small businesses, and we saw the really large businesses come out and hate it. But the Senate still maintains its support for homestead exemptions. You have, of course, the crosswinds of, well, homeowners are a very active voter base. And, you can't divorce that from this broader topic, but also the question of should we be incentivizing home ownership as a thing generally? Is that a good that the state should be, at least trying to provide? On the other side, Texas touts its very friendly business environment, and property taxes are something that runs counter to that. It's out of necessity for various reasons. Particularly, we've banned an income tax. There's no other really option. You can't. A full consumption tax would be very high. Nobody would want to pass that or pay that, frankly. Also, it leaves the state to a more volatility. If they're on the hook for all this other funding, plus all this consumption tax collection. So we're not exactly back at square one from last session, particularly with the speaker and the lieutenant governor getting along a lot better. But you do see two clear visions, and the Senate, I don't foresee backing down from this. The question is that we're going to have a fight over: is the House going to get its $250,000 business personal property tax exemption, and will the Senate get its $40,000 homestead exemption increase? I think that's a lot. Those things are a lot easier to acquiesce to pair together than a 5% appraisal cap and what was it last time, $60,000 increase to the homestead exemption. So, there's still a fight to be had here, and from what I hear, the House is going to move quickly on its property tax plan. As soon as next week, the Ways and Means will hear this and vote it out, and then we see where the Senate is on this divide.
It strikes me that it struck me like this with us last time, and I was completely wrong about it, that these things are so negotiable because you're talking about adjustable levels, and yet it didn't really turn out that way last time. Harvey, what do you think? Is it does the fact that people are having breakfast again make this a little more soluble this time?
Ooh, soluble fiber. I'm going to do a little bit of deflection here, because I think that the bigger issue, obviously, is home affordability. And even when you pay for your home, or your home is fully paid for, obviously, you still have to pay property taxes. But the rate of growth of home insurance essentially conceals all the benefits, or has historically, the last couple of years, concealed all the benefits that consumers should be feeling from property tax relief. I was kind of surprised that the governor didn't put home affordability as some kind of emergency item, because that was a huge issue in the last presidential election. So having said all of that, it really is kind of moot in that whatever property tax relief they deliver is likely to be essentially concealed by increased insurance rates. The optics of that aren't particularly good.
But whatever they pass, you can count on it being labeled as the largest property tax cut in the history of the universe.
Of course.
Exactly.
I like the extent to which you enjoyed sharing that, Brad.
The other part of it is that Abbott wants a constitutional amendment to try to rein in local authorities from raising property taxes, particularly after they deliver property tax cuts. So I don't know that's a possibility, but we'll see. And I do agree with Brad. I think that there is the setup for a conflict, but maybe the fact that they're talking, and even on the committee level, I expect the Ways and Means chair to have a better relationship than the chair did last time around. And hopefully they can get it done in one session, and we won't have multiple special sessions for this.
Well, that seems like a good time then to raise school choice. As we've talked about this, I mean, this has seemed like the general assumption is that the time has come, the votes are there, something's going to happen. Since last we all met, now both bills have dropped. Does the same thing apply here? Is there, it seems to me even more so, there's a bit more potential, at least among Republicans, for there to be more consensus on this, though makes me feel a little nervous just saying that.
Especially since the speaker has on record, right, saying that, hey,
it's going to happen.
I'm down, yeah.
That turned it into a speaker's bill, and I might pose, and this is too broad a brush, but the Senate bill is a school choice bill that includes public school financing. The House bill appears more to be a public school financing bill that includes a choice provision.
I mean, the
The
House took
emphasis
a very
seems to be-
different approach. Yeah, it took a very different approach to this in its multiple bills and in the tone and seeming, what levers are being pushed. Brad, how do you sort this out? You follow this pretty closely.
Yeah, well, first of all, the House referred its education package to committee along with SB2. So who knows exactly what that means, but the House isn't just suffocating SB2, at least for now. I think one of the most creative things that the House did on this was making it 85% of the local and state funding per student. And so that's what they're talking about when they say it's tied to public school finance. You provide an injection into just this, whether it's the basic allotment or something else, and that automatically increases the amount going to these ESAs. Whereas the Senate, I think it would take more just straight up appropriations rather than just basic through the budget. And that saves, if they adopt this, that saves future political fights from happening over this, at least every time they want to appropriate more money to it. Maybe there will be some fight had indirectly when they talk about adding dollars to schools. But I thought it was pretty creative the way they did this. Senator Creighton was on our podcast yesterday talking about the lay of the land generally. It'll be interesting to see how he navigates this new plan, but they're going forward with SB2 until seen otherwise.
I haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast. Brad, tell us a little bit about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate Senator Creighton's mood for compromise with the House bill?
Well, he spent most of it railing against the public criticism of just school choice ESAs generally.
Yeah.
He was pretty peeved about some of the things being said, and quibble with the details on who's right, who's wrong, right? But he's very pissed off about it. And so we saw that on the Senate floor when they adopted SB2. He actually did have a more mild closing speech, and instead he went scorched earth against the few Democrats in his chamber that really criticized it. There wasn't, he didn't say specifically, yeah, well, we're good with the House's plan, let's move forward with that. I think that tells you quite a bit. They're going to have a fight over this, and it's not going to be, I don't think, very public. They'll have it out in conference committee if that's what it takes. But it'll be him and Chairman Buckley, hashing this thing out.
Brad, I wonder if he's as peeved as Abbott.
Oh my
With the
gosh.
criticism. Oh my
Oh
God.
man. This is what do you guys think of that? I mean, what's the thinking behind all of a sudden firing at Democrats left and right over this?
That's a
Can't
good
only
question. What do you
Trump.
guys think?
Yeah, and to those who aren't familiar, Abbott has been in a social media X war with opponents of his education savings accounts plan, and it's been pretty raw at times.
Yeah, I mean, but it's, what do we make of it? I mean, it seems to me though that one of the subtle points about that is not that subtle, really. There wasn't a lot of subtlety in those X posts or tweets or whatever we're calling them, but is that most of that, I mean, there were a couple of shots at Democrats that they were defeated in the primary that had been vocal, but most of the really, hard shots in those exchanges were at Democrats. And I think that makes a certain amount of sense for where we are in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of maybe a sensitivity. Democrats have been hitting your quote, defunding public education. And they've been hammering it out on their way to defeat probably, but still hammering it. And maybe there's a sense in Abbott world that, hey, let's address that and let's respond to it early and often, because you don't want that to set in the minds of folks. Maybe, I don't know.
I think that it's also part of the national political zeitgeist. The Democrats are the enemy. They're not
Yeah.
opponents, they're not adversaries, they are the enemy. And by demonizing it plays to the current zeitgeist of the Republican primary voter, which of course at the moment is the only voter that matters. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would not even call it, I would call it more belittling than demonizing, but
Yeah.
in
Fair
terms
I
of the
like
tone of those attacks. But
yeah, fair enough.
Gina Hinojosa. What did she say? Come say it to my face.
I heard
I would
a
love to see that. I would love to see that.
I read a good theory from Greg Cox. He was one of whose newsletter I recommended last time we did this. His theory was that the speaker has basically told the governor, start firing the Democrats. I'll handle the Republicans.
yeah,
We don't need to drag them through the mud on this, especially because we need their votes.
yeah.
And so it seems pretty plausible to me. I don't know that it's,
Yeah,
100% accurate.
I think Greg was pretty clear in that newsletter about saying, "Hey, look, this is just a theory. I don't,
Yeah.
but I mean, whether the actual conversations took place or not. I mean, Josh and I talked about this on our podcast last week. I think that part of the logic here makes real sense that after a pretty extended period of infighting, here we are having this conversation about, yeah, they're talking, everybody's getting along a little better. It makes sense to turn your fire on Democrats for a while in this fight. It seems like a fairly obvious play if the tenor was maybe less obvious than one thinks. What else are you guys watching in terms of kind of what's out there? Since the last time we were together, a lot has happened. We've got committee chairs. A lot of these bills have dropped now. I mean, it's that sense that, not to rub anybody in the building the wrong way, and this happens every session. We're finally in the stage where people are getting to work. There's a lot more going on. So what's coming out of this that you guys are watching? And whoever jumps in first gets pride of place.
Well,
Feels like there's
yeah.
go ahead, Will.
No,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead, Humphrey. Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say it feels like there's equilibrium back in the House, and that there's I'm not going to say a stronger hand, but a more decisive hand at the helm, and that they are better equipped to, quote, combat the Senate. For instance, on the Public Education Committee, it's essentially a speaker's committee with a bunch of chairmen. It's going to be a powerful conference committee makeup. So. And the combination of Robert Duncan and Tracy King, I think, adds a lot to the stability of the House as it prepares to confront the Senate.
Cromer, you were gonna.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it looks like Duncan has been a real good choice for the speaker. But also, I'm curious as to what happens when Dan Patrick in the Senate doesn't get something that they want. And let's look beyond property taxes because we know something is going to happen with that. But for instance, the changes to the bail system, there may be some bipartisanship on that, but will 12 Democrats in the House join with Republicans to pass some of those constitutional amendments on bail changes? I don't know. And if that doesn't happen, does Patrick go back on the warpath, or does he like Burrows enough to say, okay, just kind of chalk it up to the game? I'm not sure about that, but I'm trying to see if there's some breaking points here to the era of good feelings that we have so far in the legislature.
Grimmer, are you feeling bored? Is that what I'm hearing?
Just a little bit. I need more than a lottery, let's
I like Gromer's era of good feelings quote because it's, I've been watching Twitter a lot, and a certain chairman of the Republican Party is meeting with a lot of Republicans, including those who aren't necessarily totally in his camp on everything.
Right.
If you notice, there were a couple censures of Dallas County members,
Right.
Morgan Meyer and Andrew Chen Button, but that's it.
Yeah,
And
remember Fort Worth, didn't they try and
they tried, and guess who
Yeah.
spoke against it?
Who was that?
Beau French.
That's right. He
Right.
Um,
kicked the can down the road, right?
So yes, exactly. And so that's gonna be put off for now, and we'll see where the chips fall on this. Um, Harvey mentioned the speaker. It sounds like people are generally pretty happy with committee assignments. Now, there's always some people that are upset. Tom Oliverson is one that got put in the doghouse more than anybody else, I think. And I'm sure he's pretty upset about it. For good reason, right? Everyone would hate being sidelined.
Right.
But
But it's
then,
also not the biggest surprise on the planet
right,
that happened.
Right.
exactly. But it does seem like the those banging their spoon on their high chair aside, like it does seem like for now things are calm. Most in most places in the House. One thing I think could really rev this up is, and I wrote about this week in my newsletter, redistricting. Does the House decide to redraw maps in light of the Galveston County case that basically said, you know, majority minority coalition districts no longer need to be, kept.
Right.
You don't have to keep that in order to adhere to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. It's, it kind of opens up the door to blowing up some of these districts. And when I was going through looking, there's only about 4 or 5 that I think would be good candidates, from a Republican's perspective to try and, draw a better seat for the Republican. The question is the juice worth the squeeze? Do we want to go through this fight? Because redistricting is always a massive fight. Lawsuits will abound, as is the Democrats' right to do. And, the thing I always point out with redistricting is that this is the most political thing we do, and there's no getting politics out of it. It's always going to be a part of this. In my home state of Ohio, they tried this more nonpartisan redistricting commission. It blew up in their face. There's just simply no getting around the basic facts of this. And so, with a friendlier White House, do Republicans in the state decide it might be worth getting 5 extra seats in the state house, or making the 2 South Texas congressional districts friendlier to Republicans? I don't know if they do it, but if they do, man, that's going to open a whole can of worms.
It's hard to see the bandwidth for that, given all the other stuff on there. On the other hand, I think, Republicans nationally and in the state are, feeling the winds at their back, and that leads to ambitious decision making, I think.
However, I don't
Jim?
think the speaker wants more Republicans in the House. It's much easier to control. Joe Strauss's greatest or worst session was when he had a supermajority of Republicans, because they could always overrule, and it made it more tentative. Just to throw a different angle on this, in roughly 1 year, we begin early voting in the next primary. And just to remember, Trump 1.0, it was a referendum. It proved to be a referendum on Donald Trump, and to a certain degree on Ted Cruz. And that session, the subsequent session, the Democrats gained 12. I don't think anybody's thinking that far out, but I have talked to a couple of political consultants that are already hedging bets, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, I would think people, are thinking. Go ahead, Gormer.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No. I mean, I think the game's kind of the game was afoot for 2026 on the day after the 2024 election. But I'm hearing a lot more rumblings about that, and I think it's premature, but people are already kind of running trial ballots and testing names and stuff like that. Which, I mean, look, if you're doing that behind the scene for a candidate, it makes all the sense in the world. I want to go ahead, Gromer, and I want to go back to the committee appointments for just a second and their overall read. But
no, I'll be quick.
Gromer.
I'll just say mid decade redistricting is rare, but when it does happen, it's even more contentious than the regular redistricting. And if you look at Texas, Democrats, they start in a hole, but by the end of the decade, they kind of catch up a little bit and start making some gains because of demographic shifts. a mid-decade redistricting, that would be interesting to see if you stop that
Yeah.
natural process for them.
Yeah, to stay with the growth rates in Texas, the maps kind of
Yeah.
exhaust themselves after a while.
Yes.
And it's an interesting consideration, Brad, I think also, or all you guys given, for those of us that have been here for a few of these things, not to date ourselves too much, but, the last redistricting was relatively
Mild.
quiet and
Yeah.
mild as a result of, I think of strategic decision to make it not just to a Republican advantage, which it was, but also with a significant degree of incumbent protection. And, this would be a
Yeah.
real mood shift compared to that. But I think the fact that that happened may fuel some interest in this in the way you're talking about, Brad. I do want to go back to a bigger read of, the fallout from the committee chairs. I mean, it's kind of old news now, but, I think maybe you were there, Brad. I can't remember, but Dave Phelan did kind of an exit interview at UT with Evan Smith at the LBJ school a couple of weeks ago, and I made the trek over there from my office to check it out. And one of the things that Phelan talked about in response to a question, about things he might have done differently was he said, it's kind of not the big decisions, but the small ones, the ones that you don't take as much time with, and I certainly, he was funny, he was wry about it. You decide as you're trying to figure out the matrix of committee appointments to take some chances here and there. And, he kind of said essential to paraphrase, a lot of those chances I took, I regretted, basically. So I'm wondering, as you guys now look at the committee, I mean, there was so much anticipation and, a certain amount of, banging the high chairs trays, maybe to borrow Brad's phrase, over the issue of Democratic vice chairs and the distribution of all this. But it seems like politically, there were a lot of kind of shrewd choices made on there that in the short run seem to be going over pretty well. Just kind of what you were implying, Brad. Is that a fair characterization? Do we give the new speaker pretty high marks on how they handled committee assignments?
I think you probably should, yeah, as well as you could do. Like there's, all these moving pieces and somebody's going to be upset all the time, of course, but and we'll see how it plays out, right? Like the whole furor about the subcommittees and I think 4, 5, maybe 6 Democrats appointed to chair those. How powerful are those actually? We're going to see all of this play out. Right now it's all couched in, well, the rules say this, the rules say that. But when we get to application, we're going to really see, how much power these either subcommittee chairs or the vice chairs actually have. Are they co-chairs as have been described? I don't see that at all. But it'd probably depend on committee. You have some stronger Republican chairs and others who play ball more with the vice chair. It just will vary. It'll vary on topic at any given moment. So I think, we're going to see a lot's going to depend on how it plays out. And then the speaker is going to have, either make adjustments next time around if he's still here, make other promises, or spike the football and say, you guys were all wrong. This was actually a great deal for the majority at the expense of the minority.
Told you I could make everybody happy.
Right.
Harvey, you wrote a pretty positive review of the new speaker in a column on Quorum Report, which I'd urge people to have a look at. An interesting piece. I know what your judgment is, but tell us a little bit about it for the people that didn't see it.
Well, the start of the column was essentially that he's the first speaker that was elected as he's a trial lawyer. He's the first speaker who was the subject of assault by outside money. He was the first speaker to become speaker without the majority of his caucus. And what looks like weaknesses may prove to be strengths. He has no illusions about the governor or lieutenant governor because he was the subject of their assault in the speaker race. Therefore is motivated to make peace, but is in a real world perspective, he knows that it's a tentative peace at best. So ultimately, I think he approached the committee assignments. I think it was very nuanced committee assignments. It incorporates enough power sharing for Democrats for them to be at the table and to participate on those. We're going to have a number of votes that are going to require 2/3 majority. And you talk to most of the Democrats right now, they're pretty happy with their committee assignments. The people who are powerful inside the Democratic caucus will remain powerful. And generally speaking, and the message that he sent by hiring Bob Duncan and Tracy King said it produced a sigh of relief in the political community because, with all due respect to the former speaker, he did not have any depth in terms of political experience inside, and he's got, with Bob Duncan and Tracy King, two well-respected and well-regarded folks who cherish the independence of the House, which I think is essentially what this last speaker's race was about.
Yeah.
Go
I
ahead,
agree with that. I agree with all of that. I mean, the independence of the House, that's the important thing because even his harshest critics, well, I shouldn't say that. I was about to say even his critics wants independence. I think Dan Patrick does have some influence over some lawmakers in the House, but for the most part, I think the House really likes being the House and really likes that 150 member body that has pride, the people's chamber, as some of them call it, and that independence. And if he can keep that going, as well as deliver on some of the agenda items that Abbott and Patrick and maybe even he wants, and that's a good recipe for success. He has an opportunity here to really, really be a good speaker. We'll see what happens.
Brad, I want to pick up on something Gromer said. You have good sources of the different factions in the House. Is that sense of the House is the people's chamber and, we want a speaker who stands up for the House, is that still current among some of the more dissident members in the party in the House?
Yeah, I mean, just look at the reform, those who voted reform. There were a number of them who, even though they weren't crazy about first Phelan or then Burrows as speaker, they don't want the lieutenant governor to just get his way all the time in that chamber. I think if you look at the further right side, they don't care. They just want whatever they see as the necessary legislation to pass. And so if what's required to do that is making the lieutenant governor more influential in the House, then so be it, right? But yeah, there's this. They put out after Burrows won, they started handing out these Team House hats, and you'd be surprised on some of the, especially freshmen who took some of those.
You decided to wear them after all?
Yeah. So the way the system is and the way it was founded, there's always going to be this tension between the two chambers, and you spend more time with your colleagues in the House than you do colleagues in the Senate, and so it's just natural that you're going to develop these kind of clubs and rivalries between the two chambers. It's just kind of the way the system is built, designed. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely.
But the reason I asked you is because, I think, the closer relationships that some House members develop with Patrick seem to me to crimp that traditional expectation a little bit.
Traditional expectation of
there being a sense of House solidarity and House versus the Senate. From a overly abstract point of view, it did strike me that as we saw these coalitional pressures build inside the Republican Party, the House speakership being a focal point of that some of that fell away a little bit, and that's one of the reasons I was curious to check in.
Well, Harvey mentioned that the election of consequence is the primary, and I think that explains everything here. You have more people that are more in line ideologically with the lieutenant governor and the broader statewide electorate than you did in the past, and that just kind of brings people more towards that side of things. If that is what they view as necessary to get their intentions across the line, then that's of course who they're going to side with.
The other thing you have to look at too on this is that I'm not sure Burrows will have his members take a vote to impeach the attorney general when there isn't a deal on the other side with the lieutenant governor or the governor, that sort of thing. There were some votes that members took last session that really sort of played into the hands of Patrick and some of the outside forces. And I don't know that Burrows does something like that.
Might add one other thing, and that is we have a large freshman and sophomore class. One of the roles of the speaker is to rebuild the culture of the House. So it's a work in progress, Jim, as to whether or not that pride and independence of the House is still viable. But I suspect, at least based on Burrow's first steps, that we're in the right trajectory to restore the culture of the House or rebuild the culture of the House.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to sort of think through here is, on a number of different places in the last couple of years, and we're obviously seeing this nationally, the idea of established institutional norms versus, the erosion of some of those norms in the, recent political climate, more, you can put a bunch of different causes on there. Polarization, factionalism, one party, et cetera, et cetera. I was just kind of wondering what people thought about this kind of a change versus more of the same notion in terms of these institutional norms. Because I think that every time, and I thought the same thing, that there is on one hand, there is the very concrete issue of how that criticism of how the House was managed under Dave Phelan and his staff. And that does seem to have been, very directly, addressed by the new speaker and as part of the discussion. But there are also other kinds of shifts going on that make me wonder, just how much things are changing, or when we talk about, a certain sense of reassurance that veterans like Robert Duncan and Tracy King are now, sort of back in play and helping stabilize the House. I mean, I'm not surprised when I'm in a group like this, frankly, or a group of people that have been around for a while that feel relieved by that. But I sometimes wonder just how well that plays in the areas where there's been friction. And I guess that's, yeah.
I think you raise a good point. And on a national level, and this is sort of different because it involves Trump, but it's stunning how you take these national cuts and everything's going on. You ever think you would have a U.S. House that appropriates money that would just roll over and let the president basically do what he wants to do?
Yeah.
Even members of the same party? That really doesn't happen. They were like, wait a minute, no, this is the House. This is Congress. You can't do that. But we see that the agendas of various people, especially when you have outside influences, sometimes that goes away. So I think
I mean, I think if you wanted, you could be, this grossly oversimplifies it, but it does seem like at the national level, you're seeing this continuing to step forward on ignoring norms and what, and sometimes I'm not, you may agree with that or disagree with that, and really changing fundamental institutional assumptions where the conversation we're having and describing the House and the Senate suggests a little bit of a renormalization and a stepping back from that. And I'm just, I mean, the whole question about the nationalization of politics speaks to that. Before I open it up for questions, before we run out of time, I also want to flag, Tom Forbes raised this on the 20th, a little over a week ago in the Senate. Mays Middleton did file SB 19 on, restricting government entities from hiring lobbyists. Basically, I'm trying to avoid the term of art that they don't like here. at Pat so much. And Brad, you had kind of flagged this, maybe coming a little bit last time. I'm just wondering if we're talking about what we have the carrying capacity, what's the political charge of this issue that's been popping up in Republican politics for the last couple of sessions now, maybe since starting around 2019, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing Republicans in the House are pretty optimistic they get this across the line for the first time. Yeah, devil's in the details. How do they actually fashion the bill? Or do they just adopt Middleton's blueprints? I don't know, but they seem pretty bullish on it. And, from Burroughs' perspective, if he's trying to get the Republican Party off his back, this is on their legislative priorities. And it's a good, easy one for him personally because he agrees with it to give the party and his critics there to try and take some pressure off. And so not just him, but also his members. So that's kind of how I see the calculus. Now, are the votes there? No idea. But a lot of it will depend on what it actually looks like.
I mean, there's a certain, zeitgeisty thing about local government that's still operative that really puts some wind at their back on this, right? Harvey, what do you got thoughts on this before we go back to Tom?
Oh, I just think that it's there's a lot of wind at their back at the moment, but I don't know that all the freshmen are locked down. I just saw a question pop up on that. I know one freshman told a group of lobbyists when I was recruited, nobody ever asked me my position on vouchers, and I don't think my people support it. We're about to find out. Members are meeting the various institutions in there, particularly the freshmen and sophomores are meeting the institutions inside their districts, and I don't think it's going to change their worldview because that's as you may recall, the speaker carried the Death Star bill, which essentially neutered local government, and in that infamous recording with Michael Quinn Sullivan. Was pretty outspoken on that, along with the then speaker. So I think that if the speaker leans into it, it's gonna pass.
With that, I think I'm going to hand it back to Tom and I think Tom will probably have some thoughts, and if you guys have something else to weigh in, I kind of suspect you'll get a shot. Tom, back to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for joining us again. We always appreciate your being with us. It's always very informative and interesting and stimulating. And thanks to everyone who's been on who's attended this meeting today. We appreciate that. We appreciate you joining us. And please stay tuned on the news for upcoming PAT events. If there are topics that those of you in our audience would like for us to discuss, please let us know and we'll be happy to take them up. With that, once again, thanks to Harvey and Gromer and Brad and Jim, and we really always appreciate it. With that, we're adjourned. Thanks very much.
Thanks to Allison for putting this on.
Thanks also to Allison. You betcha.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye all.
Thanks,
Thank you guys.
Take care.